Hello everyone, Pineaaronapple here with the newest Batman cartoon, one that had drummed up a lot of interest, both the good and the bad kind, Batman Caped Crusader. A show likened to the original animated series but with a focus and style of its own. A focus on mob activity, corruption and mental health, reinventing a core cast and one-off villains to fit within this strange world it weaves. Many changes divisive, but we'll take a look at them as we go through the show. This was developed by Bruce Timm, a popular and sometimes infamous creator, who has had his hand in many shows, even many DC cartoons starting with the original Batman animated series. But it's also a stereotype that when he appears, weird shit between Bruce and Barbara will follow, so I will immediately say, there is no Bruce-Barb relationship, everyone calm down. But with that being said, why don't we talk about the major characters? And while there are a lot of single episode characters, and characters either being reimaginings or existing characters in minor roles or villains of the week, we'll bring them up as we talk about each episode separately. So let's focus on many episoded characters, if that's even a term. Also, due to the length of this script, I'll be splitting the video in two. This week, we'll cover the characters in episodes 1 to 5, and we'll talk about the rest of the show and some other details next week. First, we have Batman, or Bruce Wayne, played by Hamish Linklater. And he is a bit of a divisive incarnation. As Batman and Bruce Wayne, the characterization is written very well, and due to the show referencing mental health multiple times, the focus given to Bruce, even if sometimes coming off silly, especially in a scene we'll look at later, is a lot more focused on than I seem to recall in many of the other Batman cartoons post-Beyond that I've seen. Some standout character writing being his interactions around Harley, Alfred, and Dent specifically. Whereas with Batman, he gets that feeling of, sure, a no-shit-taking mysterious vigilante, but even if there aren't a lot of specific scenes I can think of, I think they managed to capture the detective side of him well. That many versions of Batman seem to gloss over, a balance I remember the Batman movie also having. Probably my main problem with this Batman is the performance. There are a lot of clever moments, such as when his voice changes, his Bruce facade dropping, and when he is playing as Bruce, he works quite well, but while I got used to his Batman voice, there were a few scenes where instead of brooding and aloof or intimidating, he sounded bored. Those moments may not have been many, but I found them pretty obvious when they happened. Along with Batman, we of course get Alfred, played by Jason Watkins. This is a pretty good version of the character. There isn't a lot good or bad with the character, but they do make sure to give him his time in the limelight, taking moments to highlight his relationship with Bruce, or with the late Waynes. We also get hints towards some secret he's keeping, but I suppose we'll have to wait for Season 2 for any of that. So while not stand out, they don't waste the character. Like usual, Jim Gordon is the current police commissioner, played by Eric Morgan Stewart. But while not always the focus character, much like Alfred, he doesn't get wasted. And he is a good character to have when there is such a focus on the corruption of the police force and the hand the mob has on the city. He gets a couple prominent roles, but like many of the side characters, isn't prevalent all the time. But like the other main characters, the sprinkles we get through the show do well to build them up for the finale. A trait shared with our previous characters and our main police force and lawyer characters. With that said, Jim wasn't my favourite. The only favourite being probably my favourite Jim in the show, as there are at least 3 major to minor characters named Jim. But to me, it felt like he was just kind of there for a lot of it without much agency, whereas I got more of those feelings from the other secondary protagonists such as Renee, or our next character. Oh yeah, and oh no, he's black, the world is ending! Jesus. Next is Barbara Gordon, possibly future Batgirl, current lawyer played by Crystal Joy Brown. And I think a lawyer is a great way to take this character. One that I'm told exists previously, maybe in the comics or something like that, but I've never experienced with the character before. It makes for good interactions with both her father as they argue their moral standpoints, and Harvey, the DA. Both interactions weaving into the character's drama in multiple points of the story. Oh, and she's black now. No, really, people are having these issues, and while I disagree that, say, the main comic version of the Gordons should probably stay white, just for consistency's sake, I take issues with representation of character on a case-by-case basis. My only bias being that I'm ginger, so I only get miffed when they replace a white ginger character with a black one without keeping the hair. And they've done it in a lot of the past few years. But really, in this show, their race is not much of a problem, seeming to match the character with the actor. But I'll talk more about the controversies when we finish the plot summary. And of course, we should reiterate that I'm very happy the characters weren't Bruce Timmed, and their relationship seems to be more of a professional courtesy, offering her tips when her or her father are in danger. Next is the DA, Harvey Dent, played by previous Batman Daedric Bader. And Dent himself is probably one of the, while still well characterized and explored, generic or traditional versions of the character. And Daedric Bader plays it well. But after getting good interactions with Barb, Bruce, and Thorn, he really shines as one of the semi-antagonists of the two-part finale, following his origin story into becoming Two-Face. But a very different interpretation. Usually I find that commonly Two-Face will be shown as either crazy broken man with an obsession with coins, or his scarred side of his face having its own personality, which could have worked here with the insistence on mental health issues, but instead coming after he makes a choice he believes to be moral, paired with pushing from others, the scarring takes on more of a corrosive and corruptive presence, the ever-present reminder that he and his morals have failed. And that leads him on a really interesting journey in the finale. There are mentions to him having another personality, but nothing's really done with it, explored, or explicitly shown. Now we have the triple threat of our main cop characters, the first and most moral being Renee Montoya, played by Michelle C. Bonilla. Renee gets a lot of screen time, being Jim's most trusted co-worker, and while when focused on, she is an interesting protagonist alongside Batman, once she gets her romantic subplot, and it's summarily dropped halfway through the show, she almost becomes another background character, still being there but in my memory not really getting sufficient focus. Which is okay, the show ebbs and flows with its focus on characters allowing the roster to feel filled, but the sudden drop once her romantic interest left just feels like a bad writing decision. Left in the cops are the two main examples of corruption, the first being Harvey Bullock, played by an actor I'm always happy to see, John DiMaggio. I find in my experience with the character, I never really noticed him until finding his portrayal in Gotham pretty iconic. But it seems that was the exception, as every other version of the character is a real knobhead. He's a proper smarmy git, and is compelling as such, along with his partner, but the show still takes a couple of small moments to explore the character beyond the stereotype, even if it's not a lot, making him and Flass compelling as almost tertiary villains of the whole show, at points pulling some stunts over on Dent, Gordon, and Renee. Not amazingly dynamic, but fit and slightly exceeded the role, even if, as he is, that isn't an amazing feat. Bullock's partner is Arnold Flass, played by Gary Anthony Williams, a character I had no idea wasn't original, as I have seen him in other projects, but never enough for him to make a big enough impression that I learn his name. But here, he's basically the cooler of the corrupt cop duo, being more calm, collected, and I'd say sometimes cruel, but they both do some shady shit, so that's not really unique. Flass and Bullock at least have a well-written relationship, but as a single character, much like his previous incarnation, I don't find myself caring much. Our final repeating character that is a proper costumed villain is Harley. An interpretation of the character that isn't my favourite, but is a great reimagining, toning down the bubbly girl who fell in love with the Joker, and with his absence we get a quiet, collected, and honestly, if removed from the Harley idea, chilling villain. Leaning into her already existing traits, her flexible moral code that these days steers away from her traditional form of villainy, and her real underlying intelligence, paired with her speciality in the mind as a psychiatrist. And these little changes just work. Even if the character is a little wasted, being taken out halfway through the show, when she could have made an interesting overarching villain, perhaps she could have taken part in Dent's story by using her expertise to manipulate him or something. But as I say, the only solid downside is the pacing of her character. She also gets a great new outfit, fitting her new darker character, but also not ditching the inspiration of her original costume. But as I said, my favourite part of the character is her removal from being just the Joker's lackey, and the show really hones in on that, and makes her a dynamic enough character without it. Finally is the mob boss, who is an underlying antagonist through the show, taking the places of the usual Batman mob characters, Maroni and Falcone, Rupert Thorne, played by Cedric Yarborough. And while he had his hands in quite a few episodes built up from the start, which is clever storytelling, I couldn't get myself to care about the Thorns in general. More than just pushing characters like Dent. No bad writing or anything, I just have no interest. So now with the main characters out of the way, we can do a quick overview of the rights and wrongs of the stories. The series starts with In Treacherous Waters, which manages to introduce the characters and core themes for the whole season quite well. The opening scene does well to both tease the recognisable visage of the penguin, but obfuscates the twist in the character, being Oswalda, not Oswald Cobblepot, played by Minnie Driver. And while I think I prefer the character male, she is slightly interesting in the fact that she has children that she's kind of quick to dispose of. We get our first scene of Batman, must be early days as these mobsters try to run away with their loot, not believing in the Batman. But he is quick to take them all down. It's a very well done scene, perfectly showing off the vigilante's character, and showing off some pretty well animated action. Just as he captures the mobsters, the building is destroyed by a mysterious force, leading us into the main credits. Some clips from the show in atmospheric locales under a grainy filter. The music isn't that encapturing either, so while not bad, it is an intro I always skip. After a scene to get the lay of the land between Bats and Alfred, we get to see Babs on the job, doing closing statements where she's mugged at by Dent. It's spelled out pretty quickly Harvey isn't the best of guys, but not evil. Just as Babs puts it,
"Heads, I'll ask for 20 years to life. Tails, he gets the chair."
I'm not betting a man's life on a coin flip. You're an ass, Dent.
And we get a cute foreshadow of Dent's villain persona. We see Batman doing some proper detective work, his sneaking giving me great laughs, and a decent scene where he interrogates an inspector, which is both dramatic and comedic. But like I said, this is one of the few moments where I think Batman sounds more bored than imposing. It's both a shame and a blessing it happened this early on, depending on how you look at it. In the Iceberg Lounge, a boat this time around, we get to see how much of a showman Oswalda is. But once behind the scenes, she's nothing like how she seems. Bob is on the boat with her father, and their interactions are both well written and funny.
It doesn't bother you that half these people want to see you fail?
Oh, come on, honey. I'm sure it's far more than half.
But this scene is the first of many issues to come. I have no idea if it was covered via an update, or perhaps I just had a poor connection, but there are scenes in many episodes of this season where the volume of different speakers inexplicably goes lower than it should, only to come back up soon after. Like I said, I have no idea how this happened, but it's quite obvious and frustrating when it does. But for all I know, it's just the clips I'm using for my editing software. It could be a one-off experience, and maybe other people didn't get this glitch. So I retract my statement if that doesn't happen in everyone else's, but if it was a common thing, it is an issue that needs to be addressed. Bruce arrives while Oswalda's kids fuck around, not fun to watch, as she talks with Thorn, who hints that her uglier kid is leaking info to her competitors, her interrogating him after almost catching Bruce snooping around. His solution to swim back onto the deck from a small pool of ocean water in their floor. Him coming back on deck is a small scene I really appreciate. His cardboard delivery and repeated lines really matching the whole Bruce Wayne Batman personality drama. Oswalda does her kid in, assuming Thorn was right, and while I'm not sure of the delivery of performance, it's nice to see the Penguin intimidating. Her other kid, who was attempting to rizz up Babs, finds her office and is looking for protection from her dad, and eventually gets her help, as he's been the traitor all along. As Babs drives him to gym, they get a pretty cool chase sequence in, but for a young woman lawyer, she's really calm about this. Like, sure, I don't want her to be a jabbering mess, but even with one bullet, she acts so unworried it takes me out of the scene completely. But anyway, they get saved as Batman badassly uses his car to smack the assailants across the road, so she gets the guy to Jim's office. Bullock and Flass are immediately shown as crooked as they inform Oswalda, who decides to use her secret weapon, being the thing that blew up Thorn's warehouse at the beginning, a cannon on the boat. An homage to Penguin's umbrella gun. And it's now aiming at the police station. Batman uses the Bat Sub to navigate the body-filled water and attempts to stop the weapon, getting a pretty good fight sequence in as the main henchman Iggy puts up quite a fight. Babs gets her own agency as Bullock leaves a civilian locked in the station, rescuing her, and although too late to stop the firing of the cannon, he slows Oswalda down and keeps her occupied long enough for the Coast Guard to catch her and for those in the police station to come out fairly unscathed. The episode ends as Bruce laments that now Oswalda is put away, Thorn will fill the massive power vacuum, making him stronger, and it's his fault. A pretty interesting motivation to push Batman more. All in all, a solid first episode. The second episode does a lot more with the concept of changing the villain's origin story in a way that interested and surprised me, even if the final result seemed obvious. We start with an actress Bruce was dating disappearing, and he's interrogated by Renee Montoya. The banter between the two is quite good, not only to watch, but in defining her personality and morality, only for Bruce to be saved by minor character Lucius Fox, in this version playing Bruce's lawyer, played by Bumper Robinson. Batman gives her the seal of approval while using a bug to listen in on her, and she continues to investigate the disappearance by talking to a co-star of the actress, Basil Carlo. So immediately I knew this was going to be a Clayface episode, but to be fair, without it being different for the sake of it, the twists in the story are genuinely creative, and had me interested the whole time, wondering how Clayface would come about. Basil is sad he never gets leading roles since he's older and scary looking, I guess, but seems like a genuinely nice guy, who was quite close with the actress. Renee continues to investigate Basil under suspicion, but he's murdered before she can speak to him again, with the culprit encountering the Bat just outside, with a pretty striking and good-looking outfit in a nice chase sequence. This caught me pretty off guard, and if I wasn't intrigued already, I would have been now. We get a few scenes from the captive's point of view. Wow, just now realizing I never remembered her name. But a creepy doctor is keeping her captive, and the tension and mystery is effective. Dent gets to interact with the cops.
Good luck with the crime fighting Gotham's finest. Oh, and you too, Bullock.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And there's another visually interesting on-set murder. We get some nice scenes of Renee learning the stories from the other cast, Basil apparently desperate to change his face to get better parts, including leading men that would get to be close with the missing actress. The creepy doctor from before was taking a lot of money from Basil to get results, but Basil gets punched for his trouble. After some funny scenes on set, Batman saves the director, having a pretty clever on-set fight, referencing some old Batman comics, I believe. And while the villain escapes, he finds the corpses from earlier murders. But how can that be? Renee was just talking with one of them barely an hour ago! Renee goes to the Mad Doctor's office, but Flass and Bullock decide to eat instead of helping her out. So she confronts him, but is knocked out when in shock at the man's clay-like complexion, after she punched him in the face. And Batman gives Basil's body a little poke, revealing its rubber state, being a fake. Once Renee wakes up, she is met by Basil's new appearance, revealing his body was in fact the Doctor. Killed in Basil's spree after the treatment worked, but the actress, Yvonne, that's her name, rejects him, causing him to break down, physically and mentally. So he kidnapped her and killed the others, now deciding to embrace his role as the villain. But, this might not have happened if Yvonne hadn't been so nice to him, and then, as soon as he shows up and says, I love you, instead of, I'm sorry I don't love you, she's all, ew, get away from me, freakishly handsome man. Here at Pineaaronapple, we take victim blaming to a whole new level. This is also the earliest episode where the detective angle is given sufficient credence. Sure, a lot is done from Montoya's POV and not Batman's, but as I said before, I like when Batman media focuses less on the superhero and more on the detective angle. Or hey, even getting a nice mixture of both. Basil has set up a scene seemingly from one of Yvonne's movies, and she decides to insult him, leading him to activate his classic death trap, just as Batman arrives, freeing Montoya and getting to beat Clayface into submission with a fun fight. Montoya's rescue is a little off, Yvonne could have just moved much earlier after getting one hand and her legs free, but in the end, Basil is taken in as the dirty cops arrive, and Batman escapes just in time for the other cops to see him. Renee finds the bug and gets a nice little message to tease their future interactions, ending a solid second episode. Episode 3 starts off with Bruce meeting someone special at a museum exhibition of the Elite's jewels, Selina Kyle, played by someone I wasn't expecting, Christina Ricci. Now, the performance is quite good, and in the context of a Batman villain and commentary on Gotham's corruption, Catwoman works. But even with those pluses, this was not one of my top incarnations of Catwoman. The downside of different interpretations is that sometimes they just don't hit with the viewer, and for me, this was one of those times. Some reporter that sounds a lot like Yuri Lowenthal starts talking smart about Martha Wayne, so Bruce punches him in the face. Fair enough. But the court decides he should work through some anger, landing him on Dr. Harleen Quinzel's couch. She comes off as charming fairly early, and her comments paired with the Bruce we've met so far makes for some great analysis of the psyche of both Bruce and Batman, using Harleen's expertise properly. A part of her character rarely used. It also makes the flashbacks to young Bruce in Crime Alley warranted, without having to connect to either an origin story of a villain or having that villain tied intrinsically to Bruce. We get to see some of Selina's home life with a comedic maid who's fun, but once again I'm not too sold on, as we see that while Selina is out of money, she still keeps adopting strays, and she takes inspiration from the Bat to make her own cat burglar persona. I like the Catwoman outfit they picked for this episode, reminiscent of the one highlighted in Brave and the Bold, originating as one of her older regular costumes in the comics. So she starts to spend her time breaking into jewelers, evading the police pretty well, even humiliating our corrupt duo, but after a pretty good first introduction to the Bat, she's taken in.
You inspire me. You have toys?
Meanwhile, in flashback land, Bruce is traumatized, a pretty haunted image with little Bruce, as Harley continues to analyze him well. Selina is let go on a technicality by Dent, Babs easily vocalizing the point of the scene. Selina once again starts to emulate Batman, while he doesn't seem so surprised that she was let go. On the next meeting, we get a nice chase sequence and a nice visual cat pun. But after she starts macking on him, she knocks him around with electric brass knuckles and a car that is comedic in more ways than one. The engine literally purrs like a cat. This episode is so much goofier than the rest of the show. It doesn't detract in any way, but come on. Now successful, Selina is hiding away, the maid getting more ticked at not being paid. But now we can see the more interesting things. Alfred tries to get Bruce out of his Batman face more, while Bruce puts pressure on the museum, luring in the cat. Harleen is skeptical but allows Bruce to go free, offering more sessions but not getting far. We get another flashback as young Bruce still lays in bed, unable to forget the gunshots or Chill's face. But the tension in character work is ruined by this utterly comedic shot of Bruce vowing to Alfred to make the criminals pay. I get it, honestly, but my god, I couldn't hold back my laughter. The way it's shot, he's like, "Mummy, I shit the bed." Well, I suppose, Alfred, I shit the bed. Martha's dead.
Why did you say that name?
Anyway, Bruce wants to make sure Selina... No, sorry, I still just can't get over that shot. Right. So, Bruce wants to make sure Selina is put away for good, so hires a photographer to get evidence as Selina tries to get away. Apparently, this photographer is meant to be Plastic Man, and I have to commend this show for how many references it fits in. Not just things like this and people who look a lot like other incarnations of Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen appearing, but the many references it makes to writers and creators of characters. Not a lot of them feel overstuffed, and a lot are quite subtle, so it feels great when you find out about another one. They do some impressive action, Batman having to escape a bloody panther, however Catwoman tamed that, and Catwoman almost being killed on camera by Flass and Bullock, Batman only just in time to beat them bloody, and make sure Selina actually goes to jail. The photos also show Batman beating up the cops, but the photos are sufficient enough to put Selina away, as Greta the maid runs away with the rest of her money, on a cruise to the Bahamas, and the episode ends with a final flashback from Alfred's perspective, once Bruce refuses to go back to therapy. We see him standing by the car and running into Crime Alley as soon as he hears the gunshots, paired well with the fact that the first still of the credits are their chalk outlines. It's not groundbreaking or anything, but with how much Alfred does for Bruce, seeing him run straight into the first sign of danger to help the Waynes is a fantastic character moment, no matter how small. In some nice pacing, episode 4 deals with the direct aftermath of the photos from last episode. Public opinion of Batman all over the place, with the mayor looking to keep his place in the upcoming election, going to the press and Gordon saying he's going to put together an anti-Bat task force, which Gordo puts Renee in charge of. But going after the Bat is suicide, almost like it's some kind of suicide squad. No. Although, you know what, once it finishes, maybe we should take a look at Suicide Squad Isekai. I won't go over every detail of their original operations, but after a strange introduction of Jim Corrigan as a minor character, you know, the Spectre, and another character named Jim, it's good to see the cops' methodical approach, attempting to lure the Bat out with many fake crimes. But he manages to give them all the slip, outsmarting them. It's nice to see this angle, and usually any cop trying to take Batman on is an imbecile or massive piece of shit, so seeing a battle of wits is a far more interesting route to take. They fail with Dent using that fact in his speeches, so the mayor puts pressure on Gordon, who almost gets him after finding the Bat breaking into the task force office. meaning they basically have one last chance before the mayor takes more drastic action against them. So the task force bring in Harleen to profile him. So after she mentions studying under a Mr. Crane, which if she returns for season 2 may be part of her origin story, who knows, she gives them a pretty good approximation of Batman's motives. Her insight gives Bullock and Flash the idea to use a costumed criminal, finding Firebug, who, like Flash, I originally thought was Firefly, played by Tom Kenny, SpongeBob himself. And while underused, he is a pretty interesting villain psychologically, but is really secondary to the rest of the plot, which is a little disappointing. Barb is representing Firebug, but the corrupt duo make it out of the police station with him, only pursued once she tells Jim and Renee. After some goading, Firebug shows his true colours, absolutely mentally deranged. But the duo leave him to his own devices, telling him everything he needs to escape and wreak havoc with his costume, while they pretend to fix their car. They cover their tracks by roughing each other up. Well, Flash gets roughed up. And after some destruction, they follow Firebug, who we see the twisted vision of, and honestly, he is the most chilling villain we've had so far, even with his minimal screen time. The animation really sells his derangement, if that's a word. The fire kicks up and Batman goes in to stop him, Flash only now calling it in since their prey is there. Gordon knows how bad the situation is, as it used to be one of his areas, but instead the duo send the SWAT in there willy-nilly, while the Bat tries to stop the Pyro and save who he can, having to resort to beating down the cops as he moves. Gordon gets a good spotlight, making his way inside, trying to save as many people despite Flash and Bullock, who find Firebug, now out of juice, and unable to allow him to talk about what they did. Bullock shoots the unarmed mentally ill guy out the window, getting him enough credit to usurp the task force leadership. While Jim and the Bat get some good stuff as they pull a group of children out from the flames. Although Gordon's repeated insistence of
Eastside Flats was on my old beat. This used to be my beat.
feels a little strange. Everything ends fine, but with the duo given too much of a spotlight, and the episode ends hopefully, while Renee and the Gordons enjoy a depressing after-work drink. Episode 5, almost halfway through the show. And this episode has a lot of ups and downs. Although most downs come with the pacing. This is the Harley Quinn episode. Makes sense to give her an episode as main villain, and then bring her back for a big showdown, but this episode is standalone. Although she is introduced 2 episodes earlier, and could have been built up more. This is the last we see of her this season, which just seems like a poor decision to me. It's not a slight on the episode, but is more a comment on the show as a whole. We start with a fake-out where King Tut is found by Batman prowling the streets, turning out to be a snobby rich man who recently donated his wealth. And in parallel, we see a mysterious female voice in some sort of facility, torturing a man dressed as a clown. Admittedly, the tickle torture isn't as imposing as it could be, but hey, I'm sure it is a viable torture route when done right. Harleen and Babs have coffee, joined by Renee for some girl talk. Renee is worried about Jim, these three getting to work some good dynamics.
Let's roleplay.
No.
And when they leave, Harleen gets Renee to accept a date the next day. Which, let me tell you, really pissed off some people online. I know, right? A character who's apparently, according to Google, been a lesbian since 2003, and a character who's been bi for a while now. Oh, the horror! Get it away! Get it away! This is also where it becomes prevalent, and someone else has commented on it, that the Harley characterization is inversed. We get a lot more of the fun, goofy Harley when she's Harleen, and when she's Harley Quinn, she has to be darker, stoic, and more intimidating. A nice reversal. Batman investigates King Tut's office, finding a secret room filled with Egyptian memorabilia, which I don't think we really get an explanation for. Kinda weird. And he finds a bunch of used checks to Harleen, before having to fight his way out in a cool stealth scene courtesy of Bullock and Flash. We get to see Harley Quinn's first appearance as she finally gets menacing against an asshole she's working with. So she imposingly kidnaps him, and we get our first look at her base and new costume. It took me a while to come around on the costume, but it works really well in this, even the new colour palette. So while I don't think I want this to migrate to Prime Harley, it's a pretty cool version for this show. Her playpen is also quite the impressive visual, every detail doing well to lean into this new independent Harley. As said before, really leaning into her own tendencies without everything she does playing second fiddle to the Joker, displaying the mental power she has over her patients. Using some great manipulation and dark lines, getting this baby man to beat her new captive into submission. A pretty impressive introduction to how the new Harley operates. Batman continues the Harleen angle while Babs is assigned to King Tut, who after hearing Harleen's name, hearing it as Harley Quinn, runs through Arkham, followed impressively by Babs, who just manages to stop him committing, as the YouTube algorithm likes us to call it, sewer slide, tipping Babs off, even later catching Harleen in a lie, knowing something is up, and Harley's date is the perfect opportunity for a distraction. This makes some good characterization for Barb, as she sees Jim, who convinces her to look into Harleen, even though she wants to trust her friend. Later on, she finds Harleen's office ransacked by the Bat, taking the opportunity to look into her logbook, cleverly finding evidence of her lies, and finding a hidden address that she heads out to investigate, even if the focus is on Harley. I like that they're spreading the agency among the other characters, giving Babs a small spotlight, a boon of having all your characters interact beforehand. But of course, as I made my opinion clear, paying off a little too early. Babs is kept out of the house by its owner, but parks her car away and doubles back, only to be dissuaded by the Bat, him leaving her outside as he sneaks down to the basement. Harleen and Renee are kinda cute on their date, but even so, I can't say I care immensely. But her minion at the house reports Babs' appearance, so she heads over to make sure everything's hunky-dory, getting there in record time as she meets Batman, as he discovers the playpen. Babs has also made her way inside, but apparently Harleen also had time to do a costume change, getting a pretty good confrontation with Batman where he fights the patients, but ends up locked in one of the cells and gassed to unconsciousness. Harley hitting the self-destruct and leaving. Babs finds Batman and tries to save Batman by batting down the door to his cell with a bat. Was that enough bats in a sentence for you? On her way out, Harleen sees Babs' car, heading back to the house to try to save her, but it's too late. The house blowing up and sliding off the cliff as the two women try to escape. The set piece of the collapsing building is pretty well done. Babs eventually left dangling with Harley, a nice repeat from what happened in the flashbacks of Return of the Joker. Both falling after Harley tries to sacrifice herself, and Batman only managing to wake and save Babs. This sacrifice thing is good from a character perspective, reiterating that Harley may be cruel, but is trying to do good in her own twisted way, but I feel like that angle could have been better portrayed. The Bat and Babs share a nice moment as she grieves Harleen's apparent death, Batman utterly failing to console her as he pulls his disappearing act, and the episode ends with Harleen calling Renee from a phone booth, leaving her stood up to go into hiding God knows where. A solid mid-season episode, but the elements it contains, Harley Quinn's reveal and the evolution of her relationship with Babs and Renee, could have been paced better. If those moments were shown in more episodes so that these revelations hit harder, maybe even putting this episode pre-finale, as it involves so many characters, but as it is, it's fine. And with the midpoint of the show, we'll close off part 1 of the review. As I said before, I wanted to get this show done in one video, but the way that I wrote the review ended up being quite long, so I decided, instead of pushing the video back another week and putting the scripts together, I'll just split it in half. One this week, and the rest of the review will be coming out in a part 2 video next week, discussing episodes 6 to 10, taking a closer look at some of the controversies of the show, and giving my final thoughts. So I hope to see you next week. Thank you all for watching part 1 of my review. Like the video if you liked it. Comment down below if you wish. Consider subscribing to the channel. And if you do, ring that notification bell so you're told every single time that I make an upload. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next review. Bye!
Toast. A little piece of toast. Because there's so much to choose from. There's brown bread, white bread, all sorts of wholemeal bread. It comes in funny packages with writing on the side.